Iran's most famous ski destination is Tol Resort, which overlooks the capital, Tehran. You can reach it via a 7-kilometer chairlift from the Tehran suburb of Tajrish. On the way up the chairlift, if you turn around at just the right time, you can see something interesting. A giant, walled-off area filled with lush, green trees. Amongst the trees is the palace of the former Shah of Iran. His Majesty liked skiing, hence the convenient chairlift. These days, it's where the President of Iran holds big events and meets with world leaders. Right on the edge of the palace grounds is a concrete building 5 stories high. If you happen to be on the chairlift at 1:37 a.m. on the 31st of July this year, you would have seen the western corner of that building explode. Windows were shattered, an exterior wall crumbled, and rubble fell onto the terrace below. Now, that explosion was no accident. It was the result of a bomb that killed an extremely high-profile target, Hamas leader Ismail Haniyeh, who was assassinated in the Iranian capital, Tehran. This attack appears to have been meticulously planned and carried out flawlessly, probably by Israel. As is its usual practice, the Israeli government has declined to make any official comment, and the Mossad simply never comments at all. But if that's true, it's wild. Killing a Hamas leader inside the compound of the Iranian president, while he's under the protection of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard, is an extraordinary statement. The Iranian supreme leader said, "Revenge is our duty," and that Israel had prepared a harsh punishment for itself by killing a dear guest in our home. There's some debate about the mechanics of how they pulled this off, which I'll definitely be getting into later in this episode. But no matter the methods they used, the risk involved in this assassination operation is extreme. If it was Israel that did this, why did they do it in such an extraordinary manner? Well, the answer is fascinating, and it tells us a lot about the incredibly complex political situation that Israel has found itself in, where it feels the need for revenge, but only in a way that doesn't alienate its allies. Today, the unbelievable assassination plot against Ismail Haniyeh, and what it tells us about the escalating conflict between Israel and its enemies. The world is on the brink of a full-scale war in the Middle East. The Israeli intelligence agency Mossad was once considered to be one of the most terrifying and ruthless spy agencies in the world, known for its daring and brutal missions, the kidnapping, trial, and execution of Nazi Adolf Eichmann, the Israeli bombing of the Syrian nuclear reactor, the assassinations of Iranian nuclear scientists. The purpose of these plots was to communicate to Israel's enemies that there was nowhere they could hide without Mossad finding them. And yet, for nearly a decade, Ismail Haniyeh, leader of Israel's #1 enemy, Hamas, has been living in Qatar for safety and security. The Israelis would like to kill him, but he's not alone. A bunch of Hamas leaders live in Qatar. It's a weird setup. Billionaire gas princes, the US military, and Hamas, all living next door to each other on the Arabian Peninsula. And they're not hiding there either. They live out in the open. Ismail Haniyeh spent years there, and nothing happened to him. You might think that sending your spies to assassinate your greatest enemies would be easier to do in a country that you share a bunch of allies with, but it's not. And the reason for that goes back to a series of Mossad operations that went terribly, terribly wrong. Israelis once saw their foreign intelligence service as invincible. Not anymore. Throughout the 90s and 2000s, Mossad bungled a few really high-profile missions. Mossad used to have the image of working like a Swiss clock, but now it is almost like Swiss cheese. But the biggest of all their screw-ups came in 2010, and that's because they screwed up in a very particular way. This is the spy story that could well spell the end of old-fashioned cloak and dagger espionage. This time, the operation was in Dubai, in the United Arab Emirates. The target, Hamas's top weapons supplier, a man named Mahmoud al-Mabhouh. The Palestinian resistance fighter was known to Mossad for buying weapons from Iran, and was notorious for kidnapping and killing 2 Israeli soldiers in 1989. It was called Operation Plasma Screen. I assume Mossad had run out of intimidating operation names, and had moved on to household appliances. It involved more than 20 Mossad agents, all traveling on non-Israeli passports. That's really necessary for the operation to work. At the time, more than 24 countries, including the UAE, did not accept Israeli passports. So while the CIA and MI6 can print Jack Ryan and James Bond new passports whenever they like, Mossad agents have to use foreign passports. Without those foreign passports, there's no Operation Plasma Screen. Not to mention Operation DVD Player, Operation Lazy Boy Recliner, and Operation Universal Remote. So how do you get hold of foreign passports? Well, apparently Israel developed a system. If you're an Israeli with 2 passports, be that second passport British or Australian, you can be approached by an official. The official asks you if you need that second passport in the short term. And if you say no, you're asked if, out of duty to the country, you'd be prepared to have your passport details borrowed. Best no one asks what they're being borrowed for. Operation Plasma Screen would require more than 20 of these borrowed passports. Using fake passports more than once is risky. They'd have to get the job done with as few visits to Dubai as possible. On visit 1, the agents followed Al-Mabhouh around Dubai, observing his patterns. On visit 2, they slipped poison into his drink, but he inconveniently failed to die and went home to Syria, thinking that he was just sick. 2 months later, alive and well, he headed back to Dubai. Spies traveling on the same set of passports followed him again. Mabhouh arrives from Damascus mid-afternoon and is watched by several operatives. The man in the baseball cap goes by the name of Australian Adam Corman. Virtually the entire operation is captured on CCTV. Israeli operatives follow Al-Mabhouh from the airport to the hotel. When he goes to his room, 2 spies with tennis rackets manage to slide into the lift with him. Hate it when people do that. One of the tennis players watches which room he goes into. The operatives book a room opposite, and still more agents move in. When the Hamas man leaves to go shopping, he's followed every step of the way. It's quite funny watching these surveillance teams go about their business. You can see them changing disguises into business suits, pushing on doors that say, "Pull," endlessly wandering up and down hotel corridors like weird business ghosts. Meanwhile, 4 of them break into Al-Mabhouh's room. The Hamas official arrives back from his shopping trip and into the ambush of 4 assassins. They use a special ultrasonic device to anesthetize him without a needle and lower him to the floor, waiting for his heart to stop. But they aren't out of the woods yet. Once a team like this starts working, it is very easy technologically to trace them at each and every point of the whole maneuver. Unlike in the movies, they don't have a guy in a van who hacks into the security system and erases the CCTV footage. The whole thing is caught on camera. Their only hope is that nobody will ever bother to check it. So they take off Al-Mabhouh's clothes and tuck him into bed. It'll look like he died in his sleep. In the absence of signs of a struggle, for days police thought he died of natural causes, and with agents safely out of the country, it seemed like the perfect hit. It was the passports that blew their cover. After Hamas notified Dubai police that their man was dead, it was simple for investigators to check immigration logs for anything suspicious. They discovered that the same group of people had clearly been following Al-Mabhouh in and out of the country. Dubai police say Mahmoud Al-Mabhouh's killers tracked him from the moment he arrived in the country. Warrants are now being issued for their arrest, which is a bit of a nasty surprise for the people who the passports belong to. Imagine waking up one morning only to find out that apparently you've traveled to an exotic Middle Eastern location and assassinated an alleged arms dealer. The Australians, Brits, Irish, French, and Germans whose passports had been used were not very happy. The governments of the countries the passports came from were also not very happy. They were all friendly with Israel. And here was their ally, using their passports for international assassinations. Such misuse of British passports is intolerable. The fact that this was done by a country which is a friend only adds insult to injury. This was not the act of a friend. This is not the first occasion where there has been misuse of an Australian passport by Israeli agencies. Needless to say, Dubai was angry too. That is a deplorable and unacceptable method of operation. It was extremely embarrassing and damaging for Israel. Israel relies on the support of its allies for its very existence. They couldn't risk doing this again in a place like Dubai. That's why Hamas's headquarters are now in Qatar. The Americans had an agreement with the Qataris and the Israelis that you don't kill Hamas leaders in Qatar. This has provided a challenge for Israel, which previously pledged to eliminate Hamas leaders. When those leaders aren't in Qatar, they're in other highly developed Western allied countries, like Egypt and Turkey. If you're a spy for a country that's pledged to eliminate Hamas leaders, it might be easier for you to get them there logistically, but diplomatically, it's kryptonite. When those leaders travel to meet their allies in Iran, though, the game changes. The Palestinian militant group Hamas says its political leader Ismail Haniyeh has been assassinated in Iran. So how did they pull it off? Mossad couldn't get Haniyeh in Qatar where he lived, so they had to get him while he was traveling. Mossad knew that Haniyeh traveled regularly to Tehran. They also knew that he stayed in the guest house of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps on the edge of the presidential palace complex at the foot of the mountains. It seems they had also managed to bribe two of the building's guards, offering them cash and asylum in Europe in exchange for attaching a brick-sized bomb to the bottom of Haniyeh's bed. They had the where and the how, but they were missing the when. You can't have a crew of Mossad agents hiding in the hills of Tehran, endlessly staking out the building, waiting for your guy to arrive. But on May 18th this year, something happened to help with that third thing. A huge plume of smoke coming from that site. The Iranian president, Ebrahim Raisi, was killed in a helicopter accident. The president's death opened up an opportunity for Mossad. It knew that Haniyeh would be invited to the inauguration of the new president in July. What happened next is still a little unclear. There are at least three versions of the story. The New York Times and the Jerusalem Post report that the bomb was planted soon after Raisi's death and sat there for 8 weeks, waiting for Haniyeh to visit for the event. The Jewish Chronicle in London reports that, in fact, the bomb was planted on the afternoon of Haniyeh's arrival. But whichever version turns out to be true, we know that by the time Haniyeh turned in for the night on July 30th, the bomb had been planted, and it wasn't on a timer. It could be detonated when the time was right. Luckily for Mossad, the building was unbelievably easy to spy on. You can see it clearly from anywhere on the hillside that stretches up behind the palace. You can even see it from the chairlift on your way up for a ski. Or you could dress up in green camouflage and climb any of the several hundred trees surrounding the building, which is what the Jewish Chronicle reports that Mossad agents did. Haniyeh attended the inauguration of Iran's new president, met with the country's supreme leader, and then went to the guest house. The agents watched Haniyeh's car arrive, watched him go into his room, watched him turn off the light, waited a few moments, and then pressed the button. 2 assassinations, 14 years apart. The differences between them tell us a lot about Israel's position in the world. In 2010, Mossad's operation in Dubai really irritated Israel's allies in Europe and Australia. But in 2024, Israel needs those allies more than they've needed them in decades. By carrying out assassinations in Iran, they're operating in a way that is far more risky for them, but much less likely to anger their friends. What Mossad does, though, is different from the CIA or MI6. CIA people, they don't like this stuff. You know it's messy. While British and American spy agencies do assassinate people, they do it in war zones. And they tend to do it with military operations or drone strikes. And they tend to tell the public about it. Why don't they do sneaky James Bond-style assassinations? Because it was believed to be counterproductive. You're just creating martyrdom. You're creating that feel of persecution. And in the long term, that's negative. And to top it off, it usually doesn't achieve anything. All terrorists are replaced sooner or later. The point of these assassinations is to create fear, to terrorize your opponents, to make your enemies constantly worry that you've planted a bomb under their bed, that the places they think are safe aren't really. Israel's basically sending a message to the Iranians. We can kill any one of you, anywhere, anytime. It's the same reason Russia kills people by poisoning their underpants, or their tea, or their doorknobs. Ismail Haniyeh was the chief negotiator in the peace talks aimed at ending the war in Gaza. And now he's been replaced as Hamas leader by a far more fanatical Islamist, Yahya Sinwar. Haniyeh's death potentially indicates an Israeli desire to prolong the war, and it's part of a series of tit-for-tat attacks in recent weeks that could signal an escalation of the conflict. The thing is, though, when Russia pulls stunts like this, they're condemned by the Western world. Israel thinks it's found the guardrails for how to carry out cross-border assassinations without losing friends. But right now, their friendships are quite stretched. They cannot afford to make any mistakes.